The Arizona orphan abduction takes place in 1904, a time when beliefs and biases about race, religion, and ethnic backgrounds vary significantly between the East and the West of the United States. On September 5, 1904, 57 white Catholic orphans were transported by an organization from New York City to Clifton, Arizona, where they would be adopted by Catholic families who happened to be Mexican. Upon arrival, white citizens of Clifton were shocked that the white children would be placed with Mexicans. Chaos ensued. America in the early 20th century was a growing global power made up of people from all around the world. In the Northeast, the white European heritage of most immigrants created a social hierarchy based largely off of religious beliefs. In contrast, the mixed population society in the West was broken down more sharply along racial lines. For those traveling from East to West, it created an unusual trip in how one was seen and defined. The oppressed religious minority on the East Coast could suddenly find themselves as part of the privileged race and class in the West. The journey from East to West is at the center of this story. The orphan story began at the family hospital at the turn of the century in New York City, America's melting pot, which was made up of many cultures, religions, and ethnicities. One of the major groups were Irish Catholics who were often poor and uneducated. On September 25, 1904, the family hospital loaded 57 Irish toddlers aged 2 to 6 years old on a train headed west. They were accompanied by 3 nuns and George Swain, a placement agent working with the orphanage. The family hospital's train, as Iowa Public Television explains,
trains. Those were called the mercy trains or baby trains because they focused on younger children, and you essentially ordered a child from the New York Foundling Hospital. The families would write into the orphanage and say, I want a blue-eyed, blonde-haired boy. And they would get a blue-eyed, blonde-haired boy. Yeah, it was like ordering a child out of a catalog.
This means the Catholic families had already been arranged. On its way, it placed 17 orphans in Catholic homes, with the 40 remaining children being placed in Clifton, Morenci, Arizona. On the evening October 4th, 1904, the train pulled into the station in Clifton. There they were greeted by a group of white women who thought the orphans would be adoptable, along with a small group of Mexican women who had already been selected. In fact, all the prospective parents were Mexican, a fact that the nuns had not realized before their arrival. The nuns were only concerned that they were good Catholics and had not even bothered to ask about the race of the parishioners, as Linda Gordon explains.
But of course, the Clifton Morenci Catholics were all Mexicans. Even had the New York nuns and nurses known this in advance, they probably would not have been able to predict the response of the Clifton Morenci whites, or Anglos as they were called, because racial formations and racial boundaries were considerably different in New York than in the West.
The American West at the turn of the century was a gateway for Asian and Mexican immigrants. Race became the primary way to define the social hierarchy. Religious differences, particularly among whites, mattered less than in the East. Growing Mexican population, which created tensions in Arizona and elsewhere. The population growth was due to money, as Professor Floyd, an American historian from Southern Methodist University, explains.
Basically economic opportunity, which is what it is today. I mean, even if they're cleaning your house or just cutting your grass, they're making $10, $12 an hour, which is even higher than minimum wage. And many workers only make that amount in a whole day.
While the pay was better, Mexican immigrants resented the higher pay received by whites. Whites justified their privileged position in various ways, including accusing Mexicans of having poor hygiene and arguing that they needed less money because they had a lower standard of living. Overall, whites defended, reinforced, and justified their position of power. Like the Catholic Irish, Italians, and Eastern European immigrants on the East Coast, Mexicans in the West were forced into the unskilled labor class. Given this social hierarchy, whites in Arizona did not like or respect the Mexican immigrants and could not believe that they were fit to take care of the newly arrived white orphans. The fact that they shared a religion was not as important as the fact that they were of different races. Back in Clifton, Morenci, the whites were not happy with how the orphans were assigned to the Mexican families. This turned into outrage, and within hours, whites gathered in a threatening mob. Just 24 hours later, a group of 25 white men armed with pistols stormed the Mexican homes, demanding for the orphans and kidnapping them. 3 days later, the priest and George Swain were forced out of town by a mob, leaving the nuns and children behind. Several days later, the nuns were allowed to leave with 21 children, leaving the 19 other children remaining with various white families. The white mob of the town did not view their actions as threatening or inappropriate. Instead, they saw themselves as heroes. They were considered vigilantes, and as America's television series History Mysteries explains,
the very word vigilante means alert watchfulness. It has traditionally been used to describe an individual or a group who takes the law into its own hands.
In the world as they saw it, leaving the white children with the Mexican families was simply unthinkable, both for economic and racial reasons. The white mob was simply acting within their rights to ensure the safety for everyone in the town. In their minds, they were being honorable and heroic. The kidnapping, or rescue as the white called it, of the orphans in Arizona eventually became a national and legal story. As Linda Gordon explains, the family hospital tried to compromise but was forced to turn to the courts.
Complaints. They agreed to take all the children back to New York and to replace them with suitable white Catholics. But now the Anglos refused to give up the children, so the New York foundling had no choice but to bring suit. And this case made its way through 3 layers of courts, ending at the U.S. Supreme Court in 1906.
But before the case went to the Supreme Court, however, the case was heard by Graham County Probate Court. In November of 1904, the probate court ignored the violent nature of the kidnapping and sided with the white families, certifying them as the legal guardian of the orphans. The family hospital then took their case to the Arizona Supreme Court, demanding that the children must be returned to their care. In their argument, they turned their backs on the Mexican families and blamed Father Mandolin, the priest, for mistakenly offering the children to the Mexican families. They argued that because he was a French foreigner, he did not understand the rigid racial divisions of America. The white adopted parents fought back, arguing that the Mexican families were unfit to take care of the children, calling them low-life vermin. In the end, the Arizona Supreme Court criticized the nuns for not considering the race of the adopted families, which was considered more important than religion. They ruled against the family hospital. The family hospital then petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court, which is known as the New York Family Hospital versus Gaddy case. But on December 3, 1906, the court ruled that they had no jurisdiction, leaving the 19 orphans with the white families in Clifton. As Linda Gordon points out, the court's decision did not only approve the action of the vigilantes, but also accepted that the very definition of citizenship and what it meant to be one of the quote-unquote people depended entirely on race.
Mexican witness was called, no affidavit from a Mexican was introduced, no Mexican sat in the audience, no Mexican was interviewed by a journalist. Since both sides of the trial were Anglo, the effect was not only to reinforce the white line encircling citizenship in Arizona, but also to make the Mexicans so far outside that circle as to be literally of no account.
The Arizona orphan abduction of 1904 reflects how ideas about race and religion came into sharp conflict and how attitudes varied between the East and the West. The heritage and religion of the children mattered greatly in the East, but was far less of a concern in the West, which was divided much more sharply along racial lines. Ultimately, even the Catholic nuns accepted the argument that Mexican families should not raise white children regardless of religion. The orphan abduction started because of these conflicting identities and ended with betrayal and a difficult compromise.